Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production and studio provided by MaxLux Media, sponsored by Dorada Nutrition, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to fostering quality dialogue surrounding all things local policy related in North County, San Diego. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. Today we bring to the studio Joe Mosca on my right, and then we have Jim Wang on the left. And this is part 2 of our series on climate policy and renewable energy on the podcast. So Joe is a resident of Encinitas, and he was a member of the city council from 2017 to the end of 2022. He attended Rhode Island College and received his JD at Quinnipiac University School of Law, and was deputy mayor in 2022, as well as the president of the San Diego Water District. He was also a chairperson, founding board member of San Diego Community Power, a community-owned organization that provides affordable clean energy. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about SDCP today,
Sure.
Since that's sort of pivotal to this series. Joe also recently joined the Orange County Power Authority team as the Director of Communications and External Affairs in December of 2022. So he's just been starting in that role. And then Jim on my left. Jim has been the environmental commissioner of the city of Encinitas, and his role was to advise the city on environmental issues and policies that affect the community. He worked from 2013 to 2021, is that right? So 8 years.
Correct.
I'm on the commission. He has a BS in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and an MS in engineering geoscience from UC Berkeley. He has a background in electrical engineering and time series processing with expertise in seismology and geophysics. And he's also the 2021 winner of the Environmental Hero Award for his commitment and success as Environmental Commissioner of the City of Encinitas. So thanks for coming on, both of you. I really appreciate you contributing to this series. I want to jump right into some local issues, which is something that we talked about, Jim, before the podcast, which is Encinitas and the climate emergency that the city declared. And I want you to sort of walk me through how that decision was made, how this climate emergency was declared, and sort of what steps have been taken in furtherance of the goals that were outlined in that original report. So if you can speak to that.
Sure. We've known about climate change for decades, actually since the beginning of the last century, 20th century, but we haven't been doing too much about it because it seemed to be a slow-moving disaster. So the situation got worse and worse with increasing global mean surface temperature, GMST. Now it's about 1 degree C, until the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, declared a red alert, I believe in 2018, that our GMST is getting too high. And if it got to 1.5 degrees C, then we'd have frequent natural disasters, hurricanes, droughts, floods, etc. So it requires that we being the whole world, do something about it. We are the cause of climate change, 100% the cause, and we have 100% control over it, but just take action. And the best way of stimulating action is by declaring emergency and hopefully alerting people to the problem. Unfortunately, part of the reason why we haven't been doing too much is, I think it's what psychologists call pluralistic ignorance, which means that even if I believe that there's an emergency going on, then if I look around and see that people are just calmly sitting around and not doing anything, then I have to disavow that. Now, I see you maybe questioning that, but think of the emperor's new clothes. Now, everyone could see the emperor, was not wearing clothes, but if you look around, the whole audience, everyone on the street was applauding the emperor on his new clothes. And so they're thinking, I don't think the emperor's wearing any clothes, but I must be wrong because Steve and Joe don't think so. They're saying that his clothes are great. So I think that's what's happening with climate change, is that everyone may believe from the scientific reports like UN IPCC report and the evidence of the wildfires and floods and droughts that we're seeing, that there's something going on. But I'm looking around and no one seems to be alarmed, so why should I be? So this climate emergency is just an effort to alert people to that problem. And if our city declares emergency, maybe that'll prompt other cities to do it. Show other cities what they can and should do.
Sure.
So
sort of a domino effect. So
right.
specifically, talk like locally, Encinitas and San Diego County, actually I'll direct this question to you, Joe. Like climate change is such a global issue that I think often we forget that it affects our communities here locally. Talk about why someone living in Encinitas or why someone living in this county should be concerned about the effects of climate change specifically on our region, and sort of what can be done to address those local challenges.
Well, thank you again for having me on your show. And I want to completely agree with Jim. And I remember that when Jim was on the commission and I was on the city council, Jim had raised this issue and raised many other issues on the environmental front, but had said to our city council that we ought to declare emergency on this front. And I thought it was very smart, because again, what Jim is saying is that when we at the local level raise this issue, and we basically say that climate change is obviously an existential threat, an emergency, that we are raising the awareness of this, and not only within our city, but we're raising the awareness regionally and statewide and nationally. So the actions that we take here have a ripple effect and have a positive impact around the region, around the state, around the nation, and the world. And so I'm proud that we actually decided to declare an emergency. And one just has to look outside today with the wind blowing at 20, 30 miles per hour, and having been walloped by these atmospheric rivers time and time again. And then also, even when we go back to the last summer, where we had a number of heat days, heat events that were extraordinary, that we had never experienced before, and more, the fire season just expanding. The coast in Encinitas is quickly eroding. And so all of these are impacts of climate change. And so it is incumbent upon us, it is critically important that we're not only addressing the root cause of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, but we're also preparing for the impacts of an environment, a climate that is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to some extent, regardless of the actions that we take, you both have been correct me if I'm wrong, but the reality is that the effects of climate change are going to be felt for a long time to come, even if we correct course right now, as we're attempting to do locally, as we're attempting to do on a regional, statewide, national basis. The reality is that we are going to be feeling the effects of climate change. We're going to have more extreme heat events. We're going to have more severe weather events. Can you just sort of explain what can be done to address those problems locally here in Encinitas and around the county?
So Encinitas, when I was on the city council, passed a gold standard climate action plan, which is a roadmap for what we should be doing. And Jim was actually a part of that process. And that climate action plan specifically looks at what we can do locally to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Everything from moving our city facilities to net zero, building electrification ordinances, decarbonizing our electric sector, looking at our land use policies in a way that would reduce the vehicle miles traveled on our streets, and also not forgetting adaptation policies, looking at the fact that the climate is going to change. Even if we act today, it's going to change, and that there are impacts to that change. And so how are we going to adapt to those changes? So looking at a bunch of different projects, from the Cardiff project that would help preserve and buffer 101 from coastal flooding, to wildfire mitigation plans in Alevinheim, to other flooding precautions and measures throughout the city, and longer heat days, having a place where people can go if they have no air conditioning, or their electric is down. So on those heat days, people can go to the Encinitas Senior and Community Center, so that they can cool off.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Steve,
Jim, go ahead.
Just jump in. Joe mentioned mitigation and adaptation. Those are two main approaches we can take to dealing with climate change. Now, we already are seeing effects of climate change. As Joe mentioned, sea level rise. That's why we have those thick dunes along Cardiff. But other factors are, everyone's heard about the railroad tracks falling into the sea. Well, that's largely a result of sea level rise. which is prompted by climate change. Also, the cliff collapses, where I believe 3 women were killed 2 years ago or so. That's another factor. And wildfires. Now, so as far as mitigation, there are some really important ones we've done. And we've already taken one, which was, I started in, I think, like 2015. I wrote this report about community choice energy, and it took a long time to get going, but that is the single biggest step, quickest step the city can take towards reducing its greenhouse gases, because it can be done in one fell swoop. It can be done. We did it essentially by saying we're going to approve this, and then it's done in months.
Through Community Choice Energy.
Correct. Community Choice Energy.
Also known as Community Choice Aggregation.
Yeah. CCA or CCE.
CCE, yeah. We're going CCE today.
Right, we're going CCE to CE, but that's correct. So the adaptation is, as Joe mentions, things like the sand dunes, the fake sand dunes we have along Cardiff Beach, because 101 used to get flooded, and it would be getting worse with sea level rise.
Sure. I want to pivot then to talking about CCEs, since that's going to be a big focus for guiding our conversation today, because we want to talk about how we're addressing this on a regional basis, and the CCE is a regional organization. Now, the one that Encinitas is a part of is San Diego Community Power, SDCP, which you, Joe, were a founding member of. So that was in 2021, right, when that got underway. So
2019.
So in the 4 years then since we've had SDCP, can you talk about how in practice the organization has sort of lived up to your expectations of what it could accomplish, and sort of what challenges have come up along the way?
It has exceeded my expectation by a stretch. I remember back several years ago in 2018, 2019 timeframe, when we had a subcommittee here in the city of Encinitas, and we were exploring community choice energy programs. And the whole idea of a community choice energy program, which I had never even heard about, but folks like Jim Wang were having those discussions in the city of Encinitas, and prior to even me being on the city council, that discussion was being had. In my time, Catherine Blakespear, now our state senator, and myself were on a subcommittee together, and we were discussing that. And we were working with some of our North County partners who also wanted to adopt a community choice energy program. At the same time, the city of San Diego decided they were going to be one of the larger cities in the United States to adopt a community choice energy program. And so they approached us about forming a partnership, and approached Chula Vista in the city of La Mesa. And in the end, we decided to kind of to move south and to form San Diego Community Power, because it made more sense for us. We didn't have to put any money down. San Diego had floated the original money to funding to start San Diego Community Power. And also the values were more aligned in terms of what we wanted to accomplish with a community choice energy program. 100% renewable energy by 2030 being one of the larger goals. And a lot of our North County partners didn't have a climate action plan or had that kind of goal in mind. And so it was a really good marriage with San Diego, Chula Vista, La Mesa, and Imperial Beach, the original members of San Diego Community Power. And we started off with 1 or 2 employees. Today, San Diego Community Power has about 30 employees, and they are active not only in the space of bringing online more clean energy, but they're also helping with the discussion of decarbonization of transportation sector, with the building sector, and they're reinvesting their revenues in our communities. And so they are absolutely, I would say, one of the game changers organizations that are making a difference in our region and helping us to from a climate action perspective, to be prepared for the future, and also reduce the risk of a changing climate.
Yeah. One more question for you, Joe, then I want to get your thoughts, Jim, which is something that one of our viewers brought up, is the question of how the decision was made for Encinitas specifically to join SDCP as instead of the Clean Energy Alliance, which I believe Carlsbad and Solana Beach are part of, as well as some other cities. So sort of how does SDCP compare to CEA as far as competitiveness, investment, renewables, and what was the decision made to be a part of SDCP as opposed to CEA?
So let's remember, Clean Energy Alliance didn't exist in 2019. So it was essentially North County cities that had been working together for well over a year before I came onto this subcommittee with now Senator Blakespear, and at the time we were doing our feasibility study and we were looking at forming a CCE, and Oceanside was one of the partners, and Oceanside decided that they were going to step away and take a break from the discussion. It was Oceanside, Carlsbad, Del Mar, and Solana Beach had already formed an individual CCA themselves. They were the first ones in the county of San Diego, and so we were going down the road of forming a CCA with them. Oceanside stepped away, and then when San Diego came to the table and said they wanted to form a CCA, we thought about forming one CCA for the entire county. And that made a lot of sense from the resources that San Diego brought to the table, the values that they brought to the table, number one being the 100% by 2030, and the economy of scale, because clearly with a larger city, 1.4 million people, that allowed the aggregate, if you will, to be that much more profitable, to be reinvesting in our communities that much faster, and be able to procure energy at a more people to socialize the cost over. Clearly, the rates are going to be less expensive, and so we decided. Encinitas was really kind of persuaded that was the way to go. Unfortunately, some of our North County partners were not so persuaded by that, and they decided they were going to hold back. And it appeared that they weren't going to form a CCA at all, or CCE at all. And then when we formed, we moved with San Diego, La Mesa, Chula Vista, and Imperial Beach. We formed San Diego Community Power. Carlsbad did then form Clean Energy Alliance with Solana Beach, Del Mar, and Carlsbad, which is a really small one. And so the first strategic goal for them would be to expand, because they're really small, and the economy of scale argument is really of detriment to them because of the size. And so they look to expand. And I think today they now, I believe, are going to be serving customers in Oceanside, San Marcos, and Escondido. And so good. I think that's great, because clearly this now shows that you can have two CCEs in the region of San Diego, and they both can be successful. But they are different. They are different, and one major difference is that San Diego Community Power has a goal of 100% clean energy by 2030 or 2035, depending on some of the cities. And equity, social justice, equity are all centered, values that are centered for SDCP, which may not be the same for Clean Energy Alliance. And so clearly there's room in San Diego County for two, and this allowed member agencies, cities that felt like this was a better fit for them to kind of go this way or go that way. So I think it's worked out.
Sure. Jim, do you agree or disagree with Joe as far as how SDCP has lived up to expectations in terms of being a regional entity accomplishing climate change, renewable energy goals?
Yes, of course. Joe is the expert on this, but I also want to mention that Community Choice Energy, that name really means a lot, because if you take it apart, community says that it really is driven by the community. All the meetings are open to the public. They can listen in and hear how decisions are made. Choice refers to what kind of energy we use, whether it's wind or solar or local or nuclear or even coal. Pricing, those are all done by open decisions. So you can go to a board meeting if they want to raise the price by 1 cent, then you can go and state your opinion. Try doing that with SDG&E. I don't think you'll get very far. And then as far as earnings, I know there's a lot of talk about price, because that's a really easy number to focus on, whether it's 1 cent or 2 cents cheaper than SDG or more. But pricing is something that, as a nonprofit, CCEs like SDCP, they have retained earnings, which if it's SDG&E, like a for-profit company, they call those profits.
Yeah.
So, for instance, last year, SDG&E's profits were $2.9 billion. So that's would be retained earnings for SDCP. I mean, SDCP is a little smaller than SDG&E, but those return earnings get returned to the community in a way that is chosen by the community. So sometimes that's in terms of lower prices. It can be incentives for greener infrastructure, such as better insulation for your home, for rebates on EVs, that kind of thing. But the choice is up to the community.
Sure.
This is a good point too, and I'm glad that we're both together, because what he did was I think we just jumped right into CCEs and assume that all of our viewing audience will know what CCEs are, and Jim kind of really just laid it out. And I think one of the, even from a policymaking perspective or from a consumer perspective, I mean, I thought that CCEs are amazing because local government people are in the place of, like, it's not the shareholders, but your local government elected officials are sitting on the board of directors for these community choice energy programs. And so it's much closer to the people. So you don't have to go up to San Francisco and take your case to the California Public Utilities Commission up there. You can go to a local city council member and talk about your energy needs and talk about rates and talk about all the issues that pertain to you in terms of energy. And so it's brilliant from that perspective because it is absolutely local and it's tailored. It's much more tailored than a utility that covers even San Diego Gas and Electric, which is a smaller utility, compared to some of the other utilities throughout the state of California. It still can't tailor its program specifically like San Diego Community Power or Clean Energy Alliance can to the communities that they represent. So it's absolutely brilliant from that perspective.
Yeah.
But community choice energy programs, essentially what they do, not only are they reinvesting their revenue, but they are purchasing power on the market for consumers and purchasing more clean energy. But the utility still delivers the energy through the wires, and they have the poles, and they're maintaining that. They're billing you. They're doing everything the utility does, except they do not purchase the power on your behalf.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to make, and I should have explained this earlier to people who aren't familiar with CCEs. So SDCP doesn't, they don't run they don't control the infrastructure, they don't control the power lines and all of that. But what they do is they purchase package of renewable energies on behalf of the consumer. But SDG&E is still responsible for delivering that power. So what you end up with is essentially two different bills. You have your bill from SDC.
No, same bill.
It's the same. It's on the same bill.
And the only thing that's different is that if you look at the line item for generation, if you live in Encinitas and you've decided to stay with San Diego Community Power, because again, Community Choice Energy gives you a choice for the first time ever, right? Before San Diego Community Power or before Community Choice Energy Program, you have one choice, the utility, whatever they give you. Now you have a choice, either SDG&E or San Diego Community Power. And with San Diego Community Power, you have two choices in energy products. You can go with their base product, which is 55%, or you can go with 100% product. Or you can say, look, I would rather go to SDG&E and get less clean energy at a higher price. So you can actually opt back to SDG&E if you wanted to.
But that's unique to Encinitas, because Encinitas, correct me if I'm wrong, is still the only city in the county that actually automatically enrolls its constituents into the 100% renewable energy plan offered through SDCP. Whereas in other cities, I think it's they opt into the 55% plan. I think it's about 55% renewable energies. But Encinitas residents are automatically, unless they can opt out, they can opt into the less clean energy package. But unless they do so, they're automatically enrolled in a 100% renewable energy plan as of April of last year, when the city council, spearheaded by now Senator Blakespear, made that decision.
Yeah, so, I mean, we thought that it was just an amazing opportunity to move to 100% clean energy right from the get-go. But what that means is that if you desire 100%, you don't have to do anything. It's right there. And the cost differential, it's not tremendous when you look at the generation part of your bill. All the other parts of the bill are still the same, but on the generation side, it's not a tremendous amount more, especially when you consider that you're getting a superior product, and it's one of the easiest ways of doing something about the climate. But you have a choice still. you can basically, because you get when you sign when OC when San Diego Community Power launched in Encinitas, you got two notices in the mail that said that you have an option now. You're at 100%, but you can opt down to 55%, or you can opt back to send SDG&E, your choice. And so even if you're at 100%, you still have the option to opt down or stay at that level.
Yeah. Jim, what do you make of Encinitas' decision to make the 100% renewable energy the default option? Were you a supporter of that? I mean, people argue that, hey, it's my money, it's my choice. I shouldn't be automatically enrolled in this thing. It is a higher cost to consumers. So, how do you sort of look at this issue of Encinitas kind of being on the forefront of this?
I think it's an admirable step.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned, clean energy is the single biggest step a city can take in reducing its greenhouse gases and taking a big step towards satisfying its climate action plan. And so I have to appreciate Mayor Blakespear and Joe Mosca and other people on the council for voting for 100% clean energy. Now, other cities that went to 55%, that's okay. It's still better than SDG&E.
Yeah.
But it saves them a few percent. It's not huge.
What does SDG&E offer, by the way? Do we know what percentage of their power, the power that they purchase for the renewable?
It's about 38%.
38%. Okay.
That was their last. That was their last power content label. Was you have to report to the state on an annual basis what you're purchasing and what percentage comes from renewable sources, and theirs was 38% last year. Yeah. So, but I think that's a good point too. That the state law about 20 years ago changed and said, community choice energy programs throughout the United States and starting in Massachusetts has been a very good strategy for moving toward 100% clean energy and fighting climate change. And so we think we should do that here in the state of California. And if a local government believes that they should have something other than the utility, then they should be able to do that. And so that's what Encinitas did. That's what La Mesa did, Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, and now the county of San Diego and National City. But so when that happens, let's be clear what happens. When that happens, right, the city has said to the utility, we don't want you in the place of purchasing anymore for our customers. They're going to be basically launched into the Community Choice Energy Program. But then the customer also has a choice if they want to then opt back to them. And so what we've done is that we basically gave them a choice to say, okay, we think 100% is really good, and we think that these are good options for you, but you have an option. And we sent you several notices, and San Diego Community Power has enough money to spend on marketing and let people know who they are and the fact that they still have an option. And so people have been given an option to stay at 100%, go to 55%, or go back to SDG&E, paying 2% more for an inferior product, 38% renewable energy.
Sure. Hey there, San Diego. If you're on the hunt for a way to enhance your health, I have a great recommendation for you. Dorado Nutrition is a company that's all about helping people live their best lives through top-notch American-made supplements. Their expert team has crafted products to support a variety of health needs, from weight management to muscle building and more. And with ingredients like Vidosia agrestis and Tonkat Ali, praised by a well-known neurobiologist seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, these supplements could be just what you need to reach your health goals. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your purchase by using promo code SD2023 at checkout. So if you're looking for a way to improve your health, Dorado Nutrition might just be the solution you need. So the last few years has seen statewide just enormous amount of blackouts, huge concerns over energy shortages. And here locally, in San Diego County, we can't ignore this problem. So what can SDCP specifically do, in your view, Jim, to manage the grid to ensure that power is delivered consistently during the summer to avoid blackouts, and how do we, protect our energy reserves in that way?
Well, of course, I'm not the expert on CC. Joe is by far has more experience in it, but I believe it has mainly to do with determining what kind of contracts the CCE buys. So there are long-term contracts and short-term contracts. The short-term ones you want in case there is a dire circumstance and energy is short. You want to be able to have that short-term energy kick in and say, I need so many megawatt hours Long term, of course, you try and forecast what your long term usage is going to be and buy contracts to satisfy that need. But I'm sort of talking out of my hat now, so Joe is really a much better person to talk about this.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, do you want to go in? Because the thing is, and I'll get into this in a second when we talk about the nuclear issue, but the state actually just came out and basically said, we are expecting more of these extreme heat events, which can in turn trigger more blackouts. So if we're looking at a future where this is going to become the norm, what can we do locally or on a regional basis to ensure that power is consistently delivered and we don't see this kind of situation again?
Well, I think in the first place, first thing, what we did last year, I think is just we did a better job at communicating with each other, and Cal ISO, the independent operator for the grid, letting folks know that we're reaching a point where there's an imbalance between supply and demand, and that we need to start to use less power. And I think we did a better job as a state getting out that word to our residents, to our businesses, to our cities, to start to reduce their power because there was not enough supply on the grid. And I think going forward, we're still going to be looking at this issue this summer. And one of the main reasons for that is that, during the pandemic, we're still living, believe it or not, with the impacts of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. During the pandemic, things got really slow and interrupted a lot of the supply chain. And a lot of the projects that load serving entities, I know that's a technical word, but like San Diego Gas and Electric or San Diego Community Power or Clean Energy Alliance or Orange County Power Authority or any entity that is in the market purchasing energy for consumers, all of their projects, generating projects, have not basically kept to the original timelines, and they're all late coming online, primarily because of supply chain disruptions and a whole host of other issues. And so I think the problem that we have is that we need more steel in the ground. We need more generation like yesterday. We just don't have enough generation to keep up with the demand on the grid and the way that electricity is being used. So you have disruptions in Oregon, you have disruptions in Arizona, or you have a conflict in Europe. These things cause disruptions, and California feels it. And so what we need to do is continue to find ways of advancing these projects that have been slowed down, primarily clean energy projects. We need to bring them online as quickly as possible to meet the demand that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about a sort of a statewide issue that I think is also relevant to what SDCP is doing, which is so actually, as of just today, the California Energy Commission approved recommending that the state continue to operate Diablo Canyon Power Plant through 2030 to ensure electricity reliability. Diablo Canyon is the only nuclear reactor operating in California since San Onofre closed some time ago, or is in the process of decommissioning. So Diablo provides I just looked into it today, about 70% of renewable energy or of carbon-free energy in California, about 9% of the state's electricity overall. So it's a huge part of sort of just our power supply and our energy sources. So what I want to know is SDCP purchases a renewable energy package on behalf of consumers. Is nuclear a part of that package of renewables? Why or why not? And should it be?
Well, I would first say that in terms of the decision on Diablo and it being the last nuclear facility in California, that I think that this is again another way of approaching the supply demand imbalance. That we have to be careful, and I know I sometimes get in trouble for these comments, but we have to be careful that we're not taking offline assets that, though they're not necessarily renewable energy assets, the traditional assets, we have to be careful that we're not retiring assets before we can replace those assets with clean energy assets. And Diablo, as you said, is such a significant energy generating asset that for that to go offline would have only exacerbated the supply demand imbalance in the state of California. When I left San Diego Community Power as the chairman of the board of directors for a few years, we did not have a policy of no nuclear. But I would say that that we hadn't purchased any nuclear, not because we were opposed to it or because we were seeking it, but just solar was less expensive and much more abundant, and so we didn't purchase it. Now I don't know what the case is today. If there's any part of that portfolio, I know that San Diego Community Power did purchase unilaterally some power from the local utility. So they may have received some of, I know SDG&E had some nuclear in their portfolio. With the current Community Choice Energy program that I work for, Orange County Power Authority, we don't have a policy of no nuclear. We don't have a policy of being excited about purchasing nuclear either. And I think we have about 2% nuclear in our portfolio.
About 2%. Okay. Jim, I want to turn to you to ask about the nuclear issue, but just a few things that I mentioned in our first part of this series is that nuclear energy right now is actually the largest source of clean power in the United States. It generates nearly 800 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year and produces more than half of the nation's emissions-free electricity, which avoids 470 million metric tons of carbon each year, which is the equivalent of removing 100 million cars off the road. So, I mean, nuclear energy is, it's not traditionally a renewable energy source, but it is a carbon-free form of producing energy. It's also reliable in terms of, when you compare it to renewable alternatives such as solar and wind, it's not intermittent. So it's consistent. Other countries, France and Germany, I believe, actually rely consistently on nuclear energy. France especially.
Yes.
And so in the United States, nuclear is sort of, ever since the 3 Mile incident, ever since Chernobyl,
Yes.
it's sort of been this like boogeyman where we associate nuclear energy with nuclear weapons, but at the same time, we can't ignore the benefits it offers completely. So we're sort of at this critical point now where it's like, how much does do public misconceptions about nuclear energy actually shape how we approach the issue? So in your view, like, how do you see this being a part of the renewable package of energy going forward for us as a region and as a state?
Well, first of all, it's not renewable.
Yeah, it's
So
carbon-free.
It is carbon-free. It's zero emission.
Yeah.
It's not zero waste.
Yeah.
And it also has a long tail as far as decommissioning, which costs billions of dollars, as we're learning from San Onofre. Now, of course, as Joe said, and you said, that nuclear does have the trait of being continuous 24-hour, whereas solar and wind, not so much. So it does fill a gap right now. Now, until we find an alternative, perhaps we have to put up with the disadvantage of nuclear for a while. But I don't think anyone really likes having nuclear for the reasons I mentioned. And not only that, we, as part of SDCP, are also paying for the decommissioning of nuclear through our exit fees or PCIA. So we're paying for it anyway, which is unfortunate. But that's one of the disadvantages of nuclear is that because of that long tail decommissioning, we get saddled for the cost of it for decades.
Right.
Sure.
And I agree with Jim. I mean, the other thing I would introduce is just from a practical standpoint. I think that a lot of times there are a lot of emotions when these issues come up, but from a practical standpoint, I think it's no surprise that beyond Diablo, there is no other nuclear facility in California, and I would say that it's unlikely that much capital is going to be basically moved toward nuclear. So while we can all discuss nuclear, whether it should be a part of our portfolio, I don't have a crystal ball, but I suspect that Californians will not allow for the siting of nuclear, and there's unlikely to be any major capital moving in that area to build it out. But I also think that what Jim just said about the waste. I served on Congressman Levin's committee to introduce legislation on looking at permanent storage for nuclear waste from San Onofre and from the multiple sources throughout the United States. I mean, there's so many different areas in the United States that have spent fuel nuclear waste in short-term canisters and that are waiting to be moved to long-term location. The U.S. had a long-term storage location in Nevada that fell through, and so there is no strategy for the U.S. They're still working on it. How do you move the storage, the nuclear waste? How do you move it safely, and where do you store it on a permanent basis? So I think from, on a practical level, the capital issue and the storage issue is a big one, and I'm sure somebody else can talk about the fact that the mining of the uranium is probably quite devastating to our Earth. But
yeah, and just to be clear, the reason why Diablo is the only nuclear power plant existing in California is because there's actually a moratorium, a state moratorium on the construction of new nuclear power plants. San Onofre was decommissioned, I think, in 2015, something like that. And it's not going to be undecommissioned. So Diablo, as we can foresee, is like the only existing nuclear power plant for the immediate future. But it appears as though, as of yesterday, that it's going to be a part of our energy future for at least until 2030, if not beyond. I mean, I'm curious, like, do you, and like, this is an open question to either of you, do you guys believe that, and this goes beyond San Diego, it's not a local issue, but do you believe that sort of public sort of views about nuclear power have sort of twisted or distorted our policy perception of the actual science on the issue? Like, I don't know, either of you want to weigh in?
Well, I think the science is pretty clear on nuclear waste, because nuclear waste persists for thousands of years, and we're going to have to be guarding that nuclear waste for a long time.
Sure.
Now, I don't know how many civilizations have lasted thousands of years. I mean, ours certainly hasn't. So how can we promise that nuclear waste will be kept safe for thousands of years?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the science and public opinion are pretty negative on the prospects of nuclear. I think that it was a prudent move for the governor and our federal legislators to try to extend the life of Diablo because it's already existing, and it's a significant part of the overall portfolio for the state, and we don't have anything to replace it. And there's already kind of a supply demand imbalance because of the pandemic and because of a number of other reasons,
including those extreme weather events we talked about.
Right, climate change.
Blackouts.
Yeah, absolutely. And
we sort of need Diablo for now, at least. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. So as far as, well, shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about another big contributor towards climate change policy, which is transit, and specifically in San Diego County. December of 2021, SANDAG passed a regional transportation plan aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions through shifting people basically towards more traditional forms of public transit. And it's a $160 or $170 billion plan. I forget which number. But basically, it's going to be decades in the making. The idea is pushing people away from cars, pushing them more towards traditional forms of transit, such as bus lines, rail lines, that sort of thing. The plan is controversial, particularly because of the, shall I say, the infamous mileage tax part of the proposal, which essentially would tax people per mile that they drive if the plan goes through. So how does the regional transportation plan, in your view, Jim, further or not further greenhouse gas reduction goals, and where does it fall short in your view, if at all?
I think it's a big step in the right direction because, as you mentioned, transportation is our number one source of greenhouse gases. It's a much harder nut to crack than electricity generation, for instance, because transportation is distributed among millions of people. They're all drive cars or take buses and fly planes, and so you can't change millions of people's opinion at one point. But the step that RTP is taking is the right step. Having more efficient, greenhouse gas efficient means of transit for getting around. As long as it's aimed to be fast, convenient, and cheap, it should work. Now, the cheap part is what's running the problem right now, because one way of funding it is the mileage tax. And people don't want to pay for something that is traditionally free. But mileage tax, which replaces the gasoline tax, has its proper place because we're not earning any gasoline tax from EVs, for instance. The gasoline tax hasn't been risen for, I think it's decades, in the 90s. So that's why we're falling behind in revenues from gasoline taxes. The mileage tax actually makes sense because every time you drive a car, it does have some impact on the roads, and you are getting some benefit out of it. It's just that we're not used to paying per mile. There's no coin slot on your car that you have to put a penny in every mile you drive. But that really is what the mileage tax is. And that is an efficient way of paying for it. It's also an efficient way of discouraging, well, I shouldn't say discouraging, reducing demand for roads, because increasing the price of driving is the best way of reducing demand. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so for you, Joe, the thing I wanted to talk about is something that the last couple of podcast guests, Richard Bailey of Coronado, and before him, County Supervisor Jim Desmond, both brought up the statistic that only 3% or so of people in San Diego County actually use public transit. And so this RTP is sort of seems then like a sort of gamble to push people out of their cars, get people to use transit more. How much is this actually going to work? Is this like actually based on the sprawl and topography and outlay of San Diego County? Is this actually going to be an effective mechanism, or is it just going to simply make driving more inconvenient for people? So what's your sort of view on like how this plan actually like realistically is going to address these climate change goals and pushing people out of their cars?
Yeah, I served on a transit board before it, and it was always so frustrating when staff would bring us back these reports that showed, well, the subsidy for this line, this bus line, or this rail line was so high because ridership is low, and so we just what we have to do is cut the line. We don't have to understand why it's low, why we don't have passengers. What we got to do is just cut it. And so I think we have to ask the question, is transit important? And if it is important, how do we actually not just cut the transit, but make it more relevant? And ask the question, why are people not using transit? Is it because the frequency, maybe the trains aren't coming enough? Maybe it's not reliable enough. People go down to Encinitas train station and the train's running this time, but it's not running another time. And so I think making it more reliable, more frequent, and really kind of trying to understand what would actually get more people to take transit, because fixed routes like the coaster is the most efficient and effective way of moving people around, especially as the population's growing. I'm glad that we're, as a county, as a region, looking at our transportation system in a different way, because the way that it was being done before this regional transportation plan, or this current kind of regional leadership was looking at it, was in a way that greenhouse gases were not being looked at all. How we move people around, congestion was not being looked at all. It was a failing plan. So I think you can't take out of the mix that the plan previously was a failing plan. The state did not basically think that it was doing anything in terms of climate goals, and it wasn't helping reduce congestion. The current plan is looking at how do we increase ridership on transit, and how do we actually reduce greenhouse gases. So again, when we start off, climate change is an existential threat. It's an emergency. We need to do something about it, and we need to do something about it now. So the conversation now is about how do we reduce greenhouse gases? How do we have a plan that makes sense for moving San Diegans around the region? And so I'm happy and excited what I'm seeing, and I think that there are a lot of folks that would be happy to take transit, and driving in cars, purchasing a car or insuring a car is probably, very expensive endeavor for a lot of people. And so having the opportunity to take, have a multimodal system where people have an option to get down to the San Diego airport or get to work or go to a medical appointment, having options, I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Steve, I mentioned, there was a time when only 3% of people drove cars. They all rode horses. There's a time when only 3% of people used word processors. They used typewriters. There was a time when only 3% of people had cell phones. They all used landlines. But what happened is that those technologies improved, just as the RTP will improve transit. The other part about transit is that it's equitable, whereas cars are not. because cars are very expensive. As Joe pointed out, it costs a lot to run a car. Not a lot of people can't afford it. It's expensive to just put gas in the car. So that's why I believe the RTP has promise, but people aren't seeing that because they're not looking at when only 3% of people had cell phones.
But could you imagine too that when you see some of the housing projects that are being built today, could you imagine if everybody in those units were, you have 2-3 people driving a single car? I mean, the congestion on our roads would be, it would be just horrific. And so I think that when you look at even the most recent kind of I-5 widening, the environmental impacts of that,
Sure.
of those projects. I mean, that would be the alternative to continue doing what we were doing before, which is widening freeways. We can't widen the roads anymore in Encinitas. We can't widen the freeways anymore. We're at the greatest width possible without destroying even more environment. And as I say, the more you basically make those roads wider, the more folks are going to be driving and the more congested it's going to be. So when you're looking at models for transit, you're talking about 6, 7, 8% of population being on transit would basically free up a lot of those roads.
Sure.
And so is the investment in transit worth that? It probably costs much more to expand those freeways and those roads than basically to expand transit.
Sure. I think the argument, and I'm not making it, but I think this is what the opponents of RTP would probably say, is that San Diego County, it's obviously not Manhattan. We're not built like some of these more denser places where public transit has traditionally worked. And where, there's sort of this like sprawl to our region that is unique to us compared to these other communities. So does public transit actually fit the needs specifically of our county, given sort of the geography and layout of our area?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think some of the modeling that you've seen too, it's San Diego region is unlike a lot of other regions of California. San Diego region actually fits, a transportation model very well, where you have certain where you have job centers that can be linked up with transit nodes and housing. And so I think that what you're seeing with the transportation plan is really trying to imagine what it could be. And the region the way the region has evolved does lend itself to transit, to a transportation plan that will reduce greenhouse gases, will move people around, and actually probably is less money in the long run than going down the same rabbit hole of expanding roads and people still wondering why they're sitting in traffic.
Sure. Jim, do you have any other thoughts? Otherwise, I had a question for you on a different topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Joe was saying, that the trolley system is very popular, and I think it's very cost effective as well. So many people depend on the trolley system. Before we had a trolley, they didn't have any other option. So that's the main thing I wanted to add. So go ahead with the question.
Yeah. No. So this is actually a question that came from a viewer that's specific for you. So locally in Encinitas, we, in the past several years, the city of Encinitas banned or has restricted natural gas. And you were the chair of the Environmental Commission that actually proposed this idea, correct me if I'm wrong. And so I wanted to...
I think I was vice chair.
You were vice chair. Okay. So you're the vice chair. So this individual wanted to know sort of the cost benefit analysis that went into supporting that decision to ban natural gas. And they also wanted to ask whether the commission factored in electrical grid failures and planned blackouts. So can you sort of just speak to the analysis that went into this decision and what factors or considerations were made?
Sure, of course. There have been quite a few studies about the cost-benefit analysis of electrification. Prime one was by, I think it's called the Rocky Mountain Institute, but I think they're now called RMI, about the cost benefits of that, because if you build a new house, just installing the gas infrastructure, you set you back $9,000. So you're already $9,000 ahead if you electrify. Then a lot of comparisons that people have used comparing gas and electric have been with old style electric appliances like electric water heaters, electric stoves, electric washing machines and dryers. Well, that's old technology because they have advanced quite a bit in terms of heat pump technology, for instance, induction stoves. Those are much more energy efficient than the old, the ones with the coil that heats up orange and takes forever to warm up. You probably remember those maybe. but the new induction stoves are much more efficient. So the other part that is hard to measure in terms of dollars is the health benefits, because any gas appliance, especially stove, which is burning right in your kitchen with no exhaust to the outside. Well, I guess you could use your fan, but so it emits a tremendous amount of NOx, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, TVOCs. These are gases that you can't sense until it's too late, and most people don't know about them because they believe the mantra that gas is clean, but it's not. So, I mean, I don't know how you put a monetary cost on that, but that's a huge benefit of just your health. So it depends how much you value your health. If you do, then you should electrify.
Sure. Joe, any thoughts on the natural gas ban?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the city of Encinitas had basically put in place the building electrification code, which essentially said that no more natural gas in new buildings and new homes in Encinitas. So folks that have natural gas can keep their natural gas appliances if they're happy with that. But new buildings and new homes would not have natural gas, and there are some exceptions. And I remember kind of being at a press conference where I think Jim was there too, and it was one of the first times I had been in a press conference for an environmental issue where we actually had folks with white jackets on. We had doctors and nurses behind us, because a lot of times people don't realize the health benefits, the health issues related to burning natural gas in your house. And people don't realize that oftentimes we have gas leaks around our house. People often have gas leaks in their house and around their house. And the instances of asthma among kids because they're breathing in methane, which is a toxic and dangerous greenhouse gas as well. And so I think that's one thing I would add to the conversation. The other thing too is that I think lost in the conversation is, again, the practical side of things. Like, so as a state, we're saying that as we move out to 2030, 2040, 2050, we don't envision natural gas in the energy portfolio for the state of California. We think that methane, science says that methane is a worse greenhouse gas than carbon, right? Because it has a longer, it lives in the atmosphere for a longer period of time. And so methane and carbon don't have a place in our energy portfolio in the future. And that makes sense. So on the local level, if we see that, for instance, San Diego Community Power, 100%, Encinitas by 2030, and other areas are moving to 100% by 2045 in the state of California. If you're basically building a building today that has a 50-year life, you're basically putting in infrastructure that can't be serviced in the future. So I think from a practical standpoint, it basically has vertical consistency, that we're now saying that it's a stranded asset, that's going to cost you more to put in natural gas if you're building a building that's going to stand for 50 years, because in 50 years from now, you're not going to be able to get natural gas. Less than that, you're not going to be able to get natural gas. And so I think it's completely consistent, and we're actually saving people money, because it doesn't make sense to put natural gas in when there's not going to be natural gas pipelines or natural gas flowing in those pipelines in the future. So I think it makes sense.
Yeah, because one thing that this person brought up is they wanted to know whether, when the commission made that decision, whether it was the cost of living index was discussed in terms of the impact that this ban would have on residents living in more affordable housing units that will be all electric. So what I'm kind of getting from Joe, and correct me if this is incorrect, but sort of you're weighing the short-term costs against like the long-term viability of natural gas, or the lack thereof, and that's like sort of what factored into this decision.
That's correct. I mean, Joe's absolutely correct on that, but it is also the health benefits and the fact that new technology is much more efficient in terms of electricity compared to gas.
Yeah.
So you not only save long term, but you save short term as well.
Yeah. Sure. But just even in terms of cold hard numbers, before the city of Encinitas can pass that ordinance, they have to basically do a cost benefit analysis, and they have to submit that to the California Energy Commission, and they have to, and that analysis has to pass muster at the CEC, and the CEC then tells you whether or not, okay, this REACH code can be put in place. We've done that analysis. Of course, there are exceptions. So there are exceptions even under our building electrification code here in Encinitas that allows people to, if it doesn't make sense for a cost benefit analysis, there are some exceptions. If you can demonstrate that you don't have to you could put natural gas in, and you could see some restaurants that apply for those exemptions where they're able to put natural gas in. You can see some apartment complexes that may do something like that. So there's still opportunities for even new construction to be able to do it. But we did do a cost benefit analysis, and it showed that actually it was less expensive, not only today, but obviously, and as you go out, that it's less expensive to go electric than to install the natural gas infrastructure.
Sure.
That's right. There's been like at least 70 of those cost benefit analysis. Because, as Joe mentioned, I don't know whether you explained it, but every time a city imposes an ordinance that exceeds Title 24, Part 6, which is CEC's code on electrification, they have to apply to the CEC, California Electric Commission,
Energy
Commission, for what's called a REACH code, saying we're exceeding your regulations and these are reasons, but we have to justify it because we have this cost benefit analysis. But that's been done in like 70 cities around California.
Sure. I want to close by talking just quickly about a local issue, which is the city of Encinitas, for people who don't know, has a streetscape project that was passed in the last few years. That one of the goals of streetscape, in addition to improving public infrastructure, is also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by making alternative forms of transit more accessible. I wanted to quickly address with you, Jim. You were involved in some of the analysis and thought that went into this side of things. So, can you talk a bit about like how exactly streetscape furthers climate policy goals? And Joe, I want to get your input too from the policy standpoint, but sort of just what analysis sort of went into that thinking.
Of course, I know we're a little short on time, so I'll try and make it quick. But the North Coast 101 area through Acadia was basically designed for cars because it was designed, I don't know, back in the 50s or so when cars were all the way and there wasn't much of many residences there. It was pretty barren, so it's car centric. But being car centric makes it not very community oriented. You don't find people walking or biking very much because it's not very friendly to those. But that's how you build a community, is when you have people who are walking and biking and they can see each other face to face. And if I'm strolling along the sidewalk, I'm seeing you, say, eating at a sidewalk cafe, I can stop and say, "Hi, Steve, how's things going?" I can't do that in a car. You can't do that in Acadia right now because the sidewalks are too narrow, if there is a sidewalk, and there's no room for sidewalk cafes. So if you can encourage more biking and walking, which is what streetscape does, and fewer people driving, not only do you reduce greenhouse gases, but you help build a community. And Acadia is a great place for building a community because it's so compact. So I want to let Joe have a chance to.
Yeah, Joe, what is you're on the city council for some time. Like what sort of analysis went into how this will this work for Encinitas? Like, does this actually help us reduce greenhouse gases? Like what sort of policy considerations went into this decision?
Well, I'm proud of all the improvements that we've made to our roads throughout the entire city of Encinitas, not only North Coast 101, but also further south and then into this part of New Encinitas and into Alevinheim. We've done a lot, and it's not. I think that it's important to to encourage kind of moving into less polluting ways of moving around. But let's also eyes wide open here. The demand always existed in Encinitas. The fact is that it's part of the DNA, the values of the city. People want to walk. They want to enjoy their city. Roller skating or on a skateboard or on a bike. This is the way people get around. They're carrying their surfboards across the 101, across in some of those areas, and so this is what people want. The demand was always there, and so what I think that we've done is we've responded to our residents. That we've created we're trying to create safe ways for people to get around, to roll, to ride their bikes, to take transit, to take their car. in a way that's safe for them, safe for folks that are driving, and in a way that they can enjoy the city, in a way that they hadn't before. 101, as you were talking about the streetscape, the 101 is no longer a highway. It's a main street. It's a road for a community that really wants to have spaces to gather, to be able to kind of meander and see their neighbors and bike to the store. When you're down there, it really, the whole kind of feeling of the area really lends itself to wanting to just be out and and just kind of take it all in. And so I think what we've done is what we've helped make it possible. With the colorizing the bike lanes, buffering the bike lanes, planting more trees, and creating designing the roads so they're not designed for people to go 60 miles per hour, but they're designed to go 25, 30, because it's a community where people don't want cars just speeding through their community. And also, if you want to be on a bike with your child, or if you want to walk, it's not conducive to that if you have cars that are going 55 miles per hour cutting right through your city. And so I think what we've done is we've made our roads safer for people to enjoy, whether you're driving, you're walking, you're riding, you're rolling, whatever you're doing. The streets are much safer, and hopefully we'll continue to make progress in throughout the city, and making our roads safer and accommodating everybody. Whatever option however you want to get around, you can do that. And I think that by doing that, you certainly are reducing greenhouse gases, because right down the street here, if somebody has an opportunity to walk down to the Starbucks or walk to the market safely, they're going to do it. They're not going to take their car, and you are reducing greenhouse gases that way. It's one of the prime ways, in terms of the transportation sector. It's one of the primary ways for local government to reduce greenhouse gases that are associated with the transportation area sector, which is the number one area for greenhouse gas emissions.
Absolutely. Well, we do have to close there, but I want to thank both of you again for coming on. Again, Jim Wang on my left and Joe Mosca on my right. This is part 2 of our series on climate policy and renewable energy. Stay tuned for the next episode, and appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Dorado Nutrition at doradonutrition.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.